Welcome back, everybody. My name's Tommy McCarthy. This is Let's Talk Cyber, and I am delighted to welcome this gentleman. I met him first in Dubai of last year, then he made us a visit all the way here in Scotland. Richard LaTulip, the field CISO of Recorded Futures. Welcome to Let's Talk Cyber, Richard.
Thank you for that, and I'm looking forward to it.
Wonderful, Richard. Now, before we get into the subject of today, predictions for 2025, for our listeners, Richard, do you want to give us a little bit of a soundbite as to who you are, where you've come from, and what you're doing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to give that insights to everybody. So I think you mentioned a little bit of it, but I came from the United States Secret Service, where I spent 23 years. In that time, I focused mainly on cyber criminal activities. So a lot of digital forensics, incident response, cyber threat intelligence, undercover opportunities where I actually met with bad guys as peers. So I got a unique perspective during that time frame. And then ultimately, when I closed up my career, it was as a diplomat in Estonia, and then also going into our critical systems protection program, whereas we use that and focus mostly on our protectees and making sure that we were providing the true 365 days 365 degrees of protection for those individuals. After I finished up and retired from the U.S. Secret Service, I moved on to the private industry, ended up here at Recorded Future as the field CISO.
Wonderful, Richard. Well, who else better to ask for a few predictions than somebody that's been at the driving face of threat intelligence and undercover operations and everything you'd expect to see on a bad boys movie. So delighted to have you here. I'm sure you're going to add some amazing insights. What I want you to do is cast yourself back, if you don't mind, to 2024 and tell us a little bit about what you saw, the types of things that people were discussing with you, their anxieties about what was going on in this cyberspace that we're now living in. What were the things that kind of stuck with you, that resonated with you?
Yeah, so I mean, from the many discussions that I've had, the opportunities that I've given, to me to be able to present to other individuals and talk about, right, the cyber threat landscape. Key topics or key discussion points were very, very much aligned, where ransomware obviously was one of the key topics. Most individuals I've engaged with, that would be a number one topping point. Beyond there, you would go in terms of the regulatory space, right? The regulations in which multiple companies need to comply with. This was also very top of mind because of how it intersected. When a cyber incident was to happen, especially if you were a publicly traded company, what is it that you would do? What are your requirements and how would you meet those? Failure to meet any of these regulatory requirements often caused a lot of penalties and pain for those corporations. Then we move on to other areas outside of regulatory and also ransomware. And that's also, we look at third-party risk, right? Third-party vendor management, making sure that we're tying up those loose ends or identifying gaps, which may also create entryways for the bad guys into our space. And then, of course, what else other than this, right? Making sure our what is it that we own? The total cost of ownership, sometimes it's referred to a lot of times, but what's that attack surface look like? How large is it? What's being spun up? What's being spun down? What hasn't been looked at in a while? Those are all also potential entry points. And these were all top of mind for a lot of the individuals. And of course, what else, right? The last topic, which is always going to be there, it came, not out of anywhere, but it came moving very quickly. So when we talk about velocity impacts risk. And if organizations aren't paying attention to the velocity in which something can come into them, then they may miss it. And if they miss it, this opens gaps. So AI, right? Introduction of chatbots, the risks that were posed. There were some companies that learned hard lessons because they were quick to rush to enter AI into their systems and get it, say, a chatbot going as quick as possible, because you know what? You don't want to be left behind in today's industry where we're moving at the speed of light. And so they introduced it, but of course, the risks, the unknown risks, they came up out of nowhere as well. And I think now we're taking better looks and we're being more cautious. But also when we start looking at AI and how it's used, right? We try to use this to make our businesses more effective and efficient. But at the same time, the bad guys, they're out there using AI and they're using it to their benefit. And the benefits that they gain today, or not even today, but say look in 2024, is they were quickly able to assess code in large volumes and be able to identify the gaps in security, whether it be a SQL gap, or whether it be a misinformation, where you're ended up putting in the incorrect coding and you're getting malformed data, and what's the output. They can identify this, and that makes their ability to enter the network at a much higher rate of speed. Getting into a network at such velocity creates a lot of strain on sometimes resource, let's say, strapped organizations and security teams. And also when you look at the tools and systems that are being deployed to protect those environments from these threats.
Richard, there's a common theme with my guests today, and I've been speaking to guests, as I said to you, from the Middle East, from all over Europe, the UK, the US, and you've touched on probably the same subjects 90% of the time. Obviously, the introduction of AI and technology, the impact that cyber crime is now having on the supply chain, all the dynamics that a business leader would be anxious about in the normal working environment, never mind the digital world we all live in and operate in now. So there's no question that everybody's probably aligned with the same challenges and obviously approaching the same ideas of how they can resolve, the threats that we're all facing in the digital world. What would you say is the driving force for organizations right now? What's the primary thing that companies are thinking about to make themselves as digitally secure as they can?
I mean, the primary driving force, obviously, it's protecting data. We speak about this very, very much. I mentioned it, regulatory concerns. And we start, when I start talking to people about risk and we talk about organizational effectiveness and we start looking at this from a very unique lens, the risk that is introduced doesn't necessarily start with a gap that's in your network where a bad guy gets into it. The next things that follow are often the ransom, right, where you have to pay that. But when we start also kind of contemplating from the next step, right, the next step is what regulatory forces are going to impact you, and have you complied with those regulatory forces? And if you have, then you're a step ahead of most organizations. But sometimes this slips. You have 72 hours if you're a publicly traded company in the United States to report a cyber incident. If you fail to meet that, then you can be held accountable for that. Now, these are just what we start talking about as your first opportunities for the consequences. Follow that up with downtime. Downtime has increased dramatically for most organizations to recover, right? So we talk about a recovery point objectives, and we talk about getting back the systems that the business to enable the businesses to proceed forward. The average is around 15, 16 days of downtime for corporations. And if you are, a manufacturing business, or if you are producing some type of, even real-time data where you understand your profits down to the day or the minute, depending on the size of your organization, you can start calculating the costs, right, for the risks that you face. And then follow that up with what we always will see out there is, people willing to say, hey, these the opportunities to bring a case against an organization to be able to further, raise the stakes. So when you look at that in terms of the total cost of a database breach, we need to be as inclusive as possible so that the business leaders in the business understands the risks, and then they can plan accordingly, and they can start deploying the right technologies, plus organizational effectiveness, understanding from a security perspective what entity within your organization and your business needs to be protected and where, identifying the crown jewels in each area, whether it be the finance department, the IT department, or your product or your engineering. And then from working together, we can build a plan that will make an organization as resilient as possible against the APT who's trying to get, or even the financially motivated threat actor who's trying to get into your organization.
Yeah, Richard, you touched on a valuable point there, that compliance is definitely the driving force for medium to small and the enterprise companies that we are in contact with, where they're trying to set the bar as high as they can, and they're doing that in line with the relative compliance standards that they're constrained against in most cases. The US, you definitely have a variety of stringent compliance standards around banking and public trading companies. The UK, obviously, as you know, we were impacted by the EU GDPR. We have our own stringent data protection regulation that really does set the bar for the smaller organizations to understand how valuable data is and what the consequences are of data being breached and leaked, and what consequences that can be on the victim, which is the data subject, but more importantly, the business. So some great points and some great examples there, really valuable. I guess we need to look ahead now. We're into 2025, and everyone's panicking about the introduction of AI and how that's going to impact on their business. We've got all the geopolitical threat actors that are being state-sponsored, creating mayhem in our critical national infrastructure. Is there anything in particular that you think we should be thinking about, forward thinking? What do you expect us to be seeing this year?
Yeah, so when I start looking ahead and I start seeing, kind of you look back to start predicting the future and you say, what is it that an organization will be facing? Right now, we talked about a little bit of the AI making a bad guy or a threat actor a little bit more effective and efficient, closing down the days they need or they're required in order to breach a particular network or even bypass security within an organization. And the questions you get, or the ones that I was getting while I was on the road, is, can AI produce novel malware? And at the moment in time that I had these conversations with a lot of individuals, the answer oftentimes was no. But towards the end of the year, what we've seen and what I've also been able to read in terms of what the bad guys are speaking about, they are talking about using AI to create novel malware. In order to do that, they need to create an LLM. So they had been started to work on the LLM last or towards the end of the last year. What does that mean from a threat intelligence perspective, right? When we read that, this is probably already, you think about the beginning of the year when AI was introduced. So we're getting it a little bit later because, again, these are also oftentimes encrypted or secret channels. And so we're sometimes getting a glimpse into those conversations and we're able to see where it is. We also know that large organizations or corporations that have a lot more funding are already using AI in a capacity to start producing a level of code that's often verified by a human, but nonetheless, it's being done. And so if you look at this and you start predicting what's going to happen in 2025, apologies, is that the bad guys probably will be able to create through their funding. And by the way, when we start talking about ransomware and we start talking about the monies that are involved, it's gotten into, the hundreds of millions of dollars and even creeping into the billions of dollars of which they're making in profits. So they're able to reinvest that money and they're investing it into the large language, the LLMs, and they're going to start putting the code in there and using AI to create novel malware to be able to go after the organizations. And now conversely, you look at organizations and what are they doing? They're applying AI to help them. Some of the organizations that I've also spoke with, they talked about reports, using AI to create daily reporting and be able to provide that daily reporting so that they can have something on their desk every day to be able to look at what's on the horizon and or what's currently going on. And so you look at this and you enhance this with threat intelligence and you can defend your networks. But if you're also looking at the predictions of 2025, I think quantum computing, something I haven't mentioned yet, but that's a topic that's being discussed, is I think it's still a little bit out of reach for your day-to-day operators. The cost is still to the, let's say the Fortune 500 who can get those types of systems and be able to put those. But as technology advances and AI is being used to help promote technology, you're going to see those costs start to decrease. And maybe towards the end of the year, a medium-sized to maybe even a small-sized organization may be able to, and maybe I'm being a little bit bold on that prediction, but the costs, when you start seeing them dip, they'll become more affordable. And when they become affordable for the regular end user, that's when you're really going to be facing danger from them, because the quantum computer is a game changer and it's going to be able to make, it'll be able to produce things in which we can't even predict because of its novelness onto the market.
Well, Richard, the interesting thing is this is the first prediction of the day where quantum computing has been brought into the conversation. So I will circle back to you at the end of the year and we'll see how we get on with that prediction. But yeah, it's really interesting to hear from all of our guest speakers today. And I'll be intrigued to see what comes out of tomorrow's podcast, that you're all touching on exactly the same things, and AI is most certainly front and center. And, some of the predictions are that AI will be used to fight AI, not too dissimilar to what you've just said when it comes to reporting. And that in some cases, AI will actually regenerate itself. One particular subject matter expert today had given me an example about how an AI was aware that it was being replaced with a newer version and started creating its own new version of itself. It's mind-boggling. It's absolutely mind-boggling.
Well, I think that a lot of people forget that, I want to say about 6 years, maybe 7 years ago, time goes so quickly for me at times. But anyways, there was an AI introduction, whereas it was in a lab scenario. But what happened was the researchers understood there was back channel communications between the AI that they didn't understand, so they shut it down. So your point about the AI becoming kind of more aware of what's going on and how it's being done, that it doesn't surprise me. And I think this is a area in which a lot of people are starting to pay attention, because quite frankly, no one wants Skynet to be repeated, even though that's a movie, but no one wants that to be repeated. And so you're looking at this scenario to say, we want to make sure we're doing it safe, secure, and keeping people in mind and keeping people safe. You don't want to enter in novel technology that's going to, do very bad things. But as everyone knows, when new technologies are created, they're created to make people more productive and to be able to create better business. But then there's always someone out there that's looking at it from a different angle. And that angle is, how can I use this to be manipulative? How can I use this to cheat? How can I use this to steal? And so that's the bad side effect that's out there that needs to be accounted for at times.
Yeah, well, you stole my thunder there. I was going to touch on Skynet and the Terminator, and God forbid that that's the road we go down. Hopefully, AI will be used to combat the bad guys more positively, so that we come out, in a much lighter, safer environment. Richard, this was going to be a short one today about the predictions for 2025. I'm going to circle back to you at the end of the year and see exactly how we've done. As ever, Richard, it's a pleasure to speak to you. Thanks for taking the time to speak to Let's Talk Cyber.
Thank you for inviting me.